Welcome to a new podcast called A More Delightful Future. We're talking about something that's meaningful, something that's impactful, and something that is magical. That's what design means to me. And so I'm going to be showing, interviews, advice, and thoughts from people creating emergent technologies where I ask, it could be hard questions, but just interesting questions that get people thinking about how to make technology more accessible, more inclusive, and more ethical. All right. And today on our first episode, we have Daryl Roy. Thank you very much for coming in today. Just a quick thing about Daryl. He's the CEO and founder of 3D Media. And they're a really cool company that I found on LinkedIn, just ranting about virtual reality. And he reached out to me to speak to him. And we had some great conversations. So I thought it would be really awesome to have for our first episode here. So full transparency, I'm a very transparent guy. Daryl and I have talked about, what we're going to be saying on this podcast a little bit. Nothing prepared, but just he's been helping me to figure out, how to figure out these questions. But we're going to just jump right into it and see where it goes. So before we start, Daryl, is there anything you want to say about the role of design in your company or just in virtual reality and augmented reality emergent technology?
Well, I think this podcast is a great microcosm of what should be happening in essentially anything that is user focused or at least user facing. Is you talked about, in full transparency, we had a conversation about this podcast prior to talking about it. That's not a bad thing, right? We had a conversation we talked about what were some of the things that we felt we weren't hearing in the ecosystem. What were some of the things that we felt were lacking in conversations, and that we had we had questions about that we didn't know the answers for. And it's essentially, the idea of a think tank where we bounce ideas off of each other to a small degree, and we give our experiences about being in the technology field. And so it's really cool to have a podcast that is built upon that idea of openness, that idea of transparency and communication and trust. And there are no bad ideas. There are some that don't pan out, but there are no bad ideas. An idea by nature is a good thing. So, and pushing the limits of what the norm is a good thing. And that's pretty cool. That's what actually got me so excited about this podcast and about, starting a conversation and really hearing, not just, obviously I hear myself all the time, so I don't really need to do that. But hearing, and as this podcast moves forward, the thoughts, the ideas, and the experiences of other founders, of other UX, UI, UX professionals, of other individuals who are working in all these different technology spaces, and really just learning as much as we possibly can from each other, so that as a whole, these industries become stronger and provide better solutions for the people who are out there and who need them.
Exactly. I love that. That's the whole point of the podcast. I might have to use some of that. All right. So the first question. So I'm defining delight as something that evokes pleasure, usability, and meaningfulness. So what makes your company delightful or impactful?
Right. No, that's a great question. So I think, as far as the company is concerned, I think what would make us, based on that definition, delightful, would be the fact that we listen, would be the fact that we don't make assumptions about what the experiences need to be in many cases. Now, we know what we've done in the past. My background as an Army vet, my background as a nuclear operator, we have mechanical engineers who have worked on the International Space Station on our team. We have UI, UX, or we have programmers and developers who have worked on a ton of different types of software, and some who have focused primarily for their entire career on virtual and augmented reality. But the point is that we don't know every experience of our end user. And when we're building training applications or human performance tools for specific job functions, we can't go into these engagements assuming that we know pretty much anything about these jobs. And to build that usability, to build that impact, we have to be open to hearing and to listening. In fact, probably about the first 30% of an engagement, very little development and design is getting done. It's almost all learning. It's almost all spending time out there. And if we can, we're out there watching people doing their jobs. We're making videos of the work that they're doing. We're taking thousands of pictures and gathering as much information about procedures and all these type of things that we can, so that before we even start, we have at the least a base level knowledge of these job functions. I would say that most of our team members who lead these projects and interface with our end users, by the time we're halfway or 3/4 way through a project, we could probably do the jobs, not to the level that these people are doing, but we could function in the space that our users work in. And so that's how we like to go into these things, as every single engagement is an opportunity to learn the real problem sets and the real challenges and bottlenecks that these users have.
Okay, awesome. That actually goes into one of my other questions. What is your user process like, your user research process? Is it more structured, where you have specific things that you do, such as what you mentioned, kind of sounding like ethnographic research? Do you have specific processes for your research?
Well, yeah, we do, but it also is very open. You know, we're a learning organization. We never, you know, our team understands that we don't and we never will have it all figured out. And if we do think we have it figured out, we probably should just go ahead and close the doors, because at that point we've decided that we're going to be stagnant and we know better, and we don't deserve to be providing this service anymore. Mm. So we want, you know, our process essentially starts out with, you know, we try to essentially, when we have a user that's interested in virtual or augmented reality, the first thing we try to do is identify a use case, especially if it's a pilot project for the first time in an organization. We don't want to go after the most complex task, and we don't want to go after the lowest value task. What we want to find is a critical task of high value that is not complex, so that users, leaders, and decision makers can understand the value in a very short amount of time. And so what we'll do from that point is we'll identify the process. We'll generally break it down to about 3 to 5 separate potential projects. And then we'll start to research each one of those. We'll watch people do the job. We'll watch videos. We'll take pictures to get a good understanding of those jobs. And based on a number of criteria, we'll choose the actual evolution for the pilot project. Then we'll really start to dive deep into that job function. We'll watch people do the job. We'll do interviews with the workers to understand the key pain points. We'll do interviews with the people who are training to understand what the metrics of success and failure are. You know, most of the time that we spend is identifying the unknown unknowns, right? Because it's easy. You can get someone to write a list and send you an email of the things that they know are difficult, the things that they know are pain points. But we like to go in and hunt black swans, right? The things that are not obvious. So we spend, like I said, probably the first 30% of a project just asking questions and learning as much as we can. And then from that point, we start to develop assets, 3D assets, and code to interact with those assets. And then we're building in metrics after that to determine success and failure, and tying it into whatever learning management system they have or into ours. And as you can tell from my explanation, we spend the programming and the development side. That's important. It's incredibly important, but all that is for naught if you don't understand what the problem you're solving is. So.
Yeah, definitely. What you said about creating success factors and everything like that leads into, you know, usability testing for in UX as a principle as well. So do you have that process as well in terms of once you build a prototype or a certain deliverable, how do you go about testing it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely, 100%. You know, from the moment that we create a proof of concept, from the first, you know, operable wireframe of a project, we're essentially sending out almost every other sprint, or sometimes every sprint, we're sending out versions for testing. After we've completed a sprint, we'll do a test of our own, and then we'll send it out, and the users are going to test it. And we ask that within 3 to 5 days, we get a list of feedback points that we can integrate. Sometimes every single one of those feedback points have been integrated by our own QC team, but most of the time they're going to identify at least one or two really critical, interaction points, or points that increase retention that we didn't identify internally. So it's a constant iteration on top of iteration on top of iteration process where, again, like I talked about earlier, we're not going to make assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to make sure to get feedback. And that's one of the keys to our success. Is to this point, we've been incredibly blessed to have very, very engaged end users who are bought into this process and who want to help us develop impactful outcomes.
Okay, awesome, awesome. And to ask more about the design team itself, this is, of course, a two-part question. We talked a little bit about this before, but I would love to hear more about it. Is what does your design team look like? We can start with the first section of it, is the organizational structure. Like, to use your own words, do you have from the prior conversation, do you have roles or do you have responsibilities for UX people in your organization? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think with a lot of companies, especially in this industry, resource restrictions force people into making UI UX a responsibility rather than a role. The responsibility of a graphic designer, the responsibility of a 3D modeler or a programmer. But the reality of it is that UI UX has got to be a role. If you think about some of the most successful technology companies in the world, you think about the Facebooks and the Apples, what sets them apart from all the other companies? What set Facebook apart from MySpace? It was the user interface and the user experience, right?
Yeah.
If you just take it outside of technology and you think about the difference between a chain steakhouse and a 5-star steakhouse in the middle of Manhattan, the reason why those two are so socially different and in reality, like financially different, is because of the experience, right? Those are the things that take good to great, the UI, UX. And when it comes to retention, the fact is that there are a lot of psychological and physiological effects that have to do that play a part in retention and in training. The dopamine effect, the whole idea that certain things like infinite scroll, if we're talking about Facebook, or the feel of the piece of hardware in your hand for Apple, or the way that you can navigate through apps, all those things release dopamine, and dopamine helps people to pay, it helps people pay attention in the moment. And then over time, the oxytocin, obviously, with the goal setting and so on and so forth, and long-term learning, which is the ultimate goal, all that comes down to UI, UX. And when you understand that UI, UX is one of the most critical factors to a learning experience, and one of the most critical factors to any experience where you need people's attention, you recognize that UI, UX is not simply a responsibility. It has to be something that someone is focused on, that their whole job time, their whole work time is centered around how does this experience, how does this interface, and to be clear, like we had talked about earlier, user experience and user interface are two separate things. They're two similar but very distinct roles. But how do this experience in this interface affect the individual in the moment, and how does it affect them long term, both when they're in the experience or experiencing the module, and when they're away from it? When they've forgotten about exactly what they saw and what they thought, well, they remember how they felt. And that's what's going to bring them back. People don't remember what you say to them, what you tell them. People don't remember, what you do for them. They remember how you make them feel. And UI, UX is what makes people feel. And that's how you make an impact.
Yeah, I love that. You said a lot of great things there. And I think that's going to be give people a lot of takeaways. But I do want to push you on this, because this is something that I think is very important for people to see, is what does your design team look like? How many designers do you have on your team? What are their roles? What are their titles? What responsibilities do they have on your team?
No, you know what, you're right. I actually didn't answer that question directly. So right now on our team, we are a relatively small team. We operate very, very lean. And so we have two subcontracted UI UX professionals right now. just two. And that's because we have two project management teams, like two project teams that we operate with. And that's kind of how we do it. We break team members. We break our groups up into teams, and we go after different projects. And people will cross back and forth, right? But we have two individuals who focus almost primarily on UI UX. And next year we'll be growing that as our projects grow. We're anticipating to start a few new projects starting in January, and that team is going to grow. Next year we're anticipating an additional 2 in the first half of the year next year. And so that'll bring our numbers to 4, which would mean 4 separate project teams, cross-functional project teams. And right now, because of, again, like we talked about before, the restrictions of resources, we have both of our individuals are UI UX professionals together, but at any given time, they're focused on either user experience or user interface individually. I think it's important, again, to make sure that when you're on these things, you're focused on these things, whether it's experience or interface.
Thank you. Yeah, I had to push on that because I think a lot of people, they understand the value of UX or UI, but a lot of people don't necessarily put that into their business. So I'm glad that you at least got to, even with limited resources, still have some people in your business with that role. So related. We're kind of going to jump around a little bit, but related to what you said about getting 2 more people next year for your design team. So what are you looking for in a UX design applicant? What kinds of important skills, resources, or knowledge or experience do you want these UI UX people to have?
Well, that's a really loaded question, right? Because we have a pretty unique way of building our team. We focus as a rule on character over skill sets, right? We believe that skill sets are very, very important, right? But the character of the individual is more important than the experience or the skill sets. If you have, I kind of look at the special operations way of looking at things. The baseline of qualifications, everything beyond that is extraneous to me, right? I want someone who is, number one, by nature, a leader. I want someone who is a risk taker. And I want someone who is obviously a very creative individual, not just in the work that they do, but in general. And a person who is continuously trying to learn, who is continuously seeking more knowledge, and seeking more influence into their work. Right. The size of a person's portfolio, the number of publications that they have or successful projects is less important to me than their willingness to take risks, because I want people to be, for me, I want a person on our team who is not afraid to push the limits of what the norm is, right? Because we don't want to be mediocre. We don't want to be like everyone else. Everyone else is like everyone else. There's nothing special about that. We want people who are going to go beyond, who are going to push further, and then who have the humility to receive feedback, not as personal, but as caring and truthful and honest feedback to work. Someone who can throw something out there that's completely wild and off the wall, and then who has the humility to hear the words, let's take that back a little bit for this particular thing. I love the creativity and I love the risk. Let's pull it back for this particular project, and we can build on that crazy off the wall, far out of the norm thing, maybe here or maybe in another place. But those are the type of people that we're looking for. It's not about the portfolio. It's not about the education. It's not about the high levels of experience. It's about the character, and it's about the willingness to take risks, and the confidence, the leadership abilities of that person. Because a team, especially as we're small now, when we are growing, teams are built on not the personality of the leader, but the character of those leaders. Everyone in our organization has to be a leader in their own way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So what does your application look like? How do you find those specific people if you're not really caring too much about their portfolio and stuff like that?
Well, we don't really do very much passive recruiting.
Hmm.
Occasionally we'll post jobs, but you know, again, I'll go back to military special operations, right? People join special ops because of the culture, right? People
Hmm.
join because they meet someone who was in special ops and they say to themselves, "Man, I want to be like that person." So most of our recruiting actually come from relationships. Most of our recruiting come from our team, or come from people who reach out. We build relationships. We understand the people. Culture is one of those things in an organization that is, that's success or failure. Again, skill sets are a dime a dozen. Character is hard to find, and so as you build that team that's based on character, it's hard to see that in two interviews. And you don't see
Hmm.
character in a resume. You see character in conversations and time spent with an individual. And so our process for bringing people on the team is based on relationships. And it is a long
Right.
process. It's not a quick process, but it takes planning. It takes understanding what your workforce needs are going to be 6 months to a year out, which is difficult to do right now in this era of COVID and economic unpredictability. But
Yeah.
even still, there are some proactive measures that you can take in building those relationships and understanding individuals and communicating your culture and finding the people who want to be a part of what you do. Because that's the biggest thing. Like, people have to want to be here because
Yeah.
perseverance, things are going to be difficult. You're going to go through hard times no matter what position you join. And it can't be about money. Money can't be your motivating factor. Not to say we don't pay well, we do, but if money's your motivating factor, it's easy to find money other places. You've got
Yeah.
to find
Yeah.
family. You've
Definitely.
got to find a place where you belong and a place where you're accepted and a place where you're encouraged to grow, and you're encouraged, sometimes even encouraged, with a firm push to continually grow,
Hmm.
continually push the limits of what you're capable of. So,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's probably gonna be one of the last questions. We're way over 15 minutes, but we spoke about this again a little bit last time, and this is related to how you hire people based on relationships. So how does diversity play a role in this? Now I ask that because a lot of the problems with companies is that they're not very diverse, and it's not because people are discriminative or anything like that. Most of the time, at least, it's because usually people have their own circles, right? And so the relationships they form with people are naturally going to be people who look like them or who they live with or near or anything like that. So how, especially with your relationship based application process, how do you keep diversity in mind? From a mental diversity standpoint, from a background standpoint, and cultural standpoint.
well, I think diversity is power, right? You know, not just from a genetic standpoint, right? Genetic diversity in terms of any organization. When I say genetic diversity, I mean people, who have more melanin in their skin, or people who are from different parts of the world, who look differently, different genders, or any of those type of things. That's incredibly important because unfortunately, our society has alienated many groups, and we've also individually siloed ourselves from different groups. I mean, when I say we in general, I mean society, not us as a company.
Mm-hmm.
We as a society have siloed ourselves from different groups, and sometimes it's geographical, and sometimes it's society by choice has done that, and that is not a good thing because that creates groupthink. And I think the success of any organization, especially an organization who calls itself innovative, an organization that calls itself a forward-thinking organization, diversity of thought is incredibly important. And that comes from diversity of experience, diversity of background, diversity of challenges. Our greatest lessons learned are from the challenges that we face growing up, or going through life. And the more diverse a group you have, the more powerful you are as an organization because you are not limited to the thoughts and experience of people that look like me, or people who look like you, or people who look like any individual. It's about the experience of the organization as a whole. you see me here as the CEO, the founder, a white guy in his mid-30s in the tech field. That's pretty common, right? I mean, actually, the reality of it is that's the norm. But what you don't see in this room with me right now is our founding team and our leadership team. Our founding team, in addition to myself and my wife, are an African-American man and an African-American woman, Lance and Jaleesa Jones. They're part of our founding team. Our CFO, also African-American, and that's our leadership team. And so what you won't see is us coming out and speaking a lot of like words, just saying a lot of things about diversity, because I believe, and we all believe, that how we have been since the beginning of this organization has been focused on people, not people of one color, not people of any specific group. It's focused on people in general.
Yeah.
And I think the unfortunate fact is that, the conversation about diversity and inclusion, it has to happen. It's got to happen. And it has to happen because a lot of groups haven't historically lived it. And so now they're speaking it into existence, which is a good thing. It starts with words, and words have to become actions. But diversity is very important to any group at every level, not just in an organization where we're going to hire for this position diversely. No, it needs to be from the top to the bottom everywhere, from the beginning to the end, as much as you can control that. So it's very important to our organization. To succinctly answer your question, it's incredibly important to our organization, and that goes back to, again, a lot of minority groups have not historically had the opportunity for experience in technology, nor the upbringing to value and education in technology. And yet, some of the most creative and amazing people you can find in this in this world are, people who are minorities. But they, without that experience, a lot of companies don't even give them a shot. And so to me, again, it's the character of the person that really drives those things, and not the experience. And that's one of the ways that we found to really bolster or to really live out our truth there, is by focusing on the character of the person rather than the experience, because a lot of factors go into experience. A lot of people try to get experience and they just can't, and for whatever reason. And so experience isn't that important to us as much as characters.
I love that so much. For so many reasons. I do have two more questions. So the first one is a follow-up question, is a little bit more advice as well. But on your page, I noticed that you don't have very much about your company in terms of your team or your projects and stuff like that. So the question part is, why is that? And the advice part is, do you think you can? I guess it's more phrased as a question, but do you think you can? You'll be open to sharing more about your team, your culture, and so on and like that on your webpage? And I say that because as a person who has been looking for a lot of these jobs and stuff like that for emergent technology, it's really difficult to see if I would fit in right to their culture. Because unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but people like me have had a very hard time, working at these types of companies. Like my friend was just telling me about how he was working for a company that's very innovative and everything like that, but they were just giving him an incredibly hard time because of where he came from, what he looked like. And this is in Atlanta, fairly progressive, but when he walks into a building, with people that look different, everybody's looking at him like he doesn't belong there, right? And this is so sad for me to hear in 2020, right? But it's real. And so, when I'm looking at a team, I have to see, do they have, other people on their team? I'm not necessarily judging you by that, but I have to consider that, So what do you think about adding, more about your team on your page?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and it's something that, so again, we go back to, in terms of our we don't do very much advertising, right? Because it's not about us, right? It's not about us as individuals in terms of the work that we do. And it's not about us as individuals towards the going public facing. Internally, it's very much about each person. And I absolutely understand what you're saying as someone who is looking to join a team. It's important to understand that. But we don't do very much advertising, and historically we haven't spent much time on our website or anything like that. And that's because we like to put all our resources in the solutions. And most of our growth has been relationship based. We are doing a revamp of our website, and I do think that's a phenomenal, as we grow our team, a phenomenal idea, or a phenomenal thing that we need to start to consider there is talk a little bit more about our team, talk a little bit about more about our culture, right? We're not really ones to toot our own horns, so to speak.
Yeah.
When we finish a project, all the credit goes to the end user, right? It goes to the points of contact in there, the engaged end users to really help us, because without them, we can't do this. But I definitely see and understand what you're talking about in terms of really talking more about the team on our website in different ways, and focusing a little bit more on our culture, outward facing. I like that. I'm going to have a conversation with my team about that. Thank you for that. I appreciate that very much.
No problem. No problem. Love that you're considering it. That's all that's important right there. And finally, the last question. I think one of our favorite questions is, how do you invent magic?
Well, I think, in that's a question right there. I think that magic, just like the Las Vegas style magic or technology magic, is never created by a single person. It takes an entire team to do one single thing of magic, right? And Walt Disney, right? He said that the secret to making dreams come true, it comes down to the 4 C's, right? It's curiosity, confidence, courage, and constancy, right? And the greatest of those is confidence. To do that, you have to empower your team. Empower your team, as I said before, to take risks and to fail. It's okay. I tell my kids this all the time, and I tell my team this all the time: is the only time you fail is when you quit. As long as you're still moving and you're still trying, you have not failed. So maybe this project or maybe this idea didn't pan out. Okay, let's fall forward. Let's keep moving and keep on trucking, and we're going to make it to the finish line there, right? This is an infinite game. This is not a single finish line that we're crossing here. Magic happens over time. And that's the biggest thing. It's teamwork and instilling confidence and trust in the individuals on your team and the people that you work with and for, because trust is the way that you get honest feedback. Trust is the way that when you build something and you send it back for V3.3 of a project, they tell you this is terrible. We need to change that. And you trust them that they're being honest and not just taking shots at you, that they're telling you this to make the project better. So it's trust and confidence. Those are the 2 biggest things. That's how you make magic. Trust, confidence, and team.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this amazing interview. I really appreciate, once again, taking the time out to do this and all of your answers. Is there anything else you want to add before we leave out today?
Just anybody out there who's listening, like I'd said a couple of times, take risks. Don't play it safe. Nobody wins by playing it safe. You got to push hard, practice hard, take risks, and go after it. That's really, and that applies to anything, not just technology. It's life in general. You want to win, you got to take risks.